You weren't supposed to hear this. The files were supposed to stay sealed, locked away in a forgotten vault under the cathedral's foundation. 211 souls erased, as if their lives never mattered. But you're here now, listening. And that means the truth is already poisoning your certainty. I want you to picture it. A cold March night in 1891. Boston's North End drowning in mist. City officials, pale with dread, breaking the rusted locks on St. Mercy General Hospital's basement morgue. The iron door creaks open, revealing a smell so thick, so sweet and rotten, that grown men gag on the threshold. In the flickering light of gas lanterns, rows of patient files, 213 of them, though the official count is 211, line the damp stone walls. Each file marked with the same phrase, handwritten in trembling script. Called to glory during sacred treatment. No cause of death, no medical explanation. Just those chilling words, as if death was the expected outcome. As if the hospital was nothing more than a temple for sacrifice, hiding in plain sight under the banner of healing. Imagine the horror that dawned on those men as they flipped through the brittle pages. Stories of patients who walked in with fevers, broken bones, consumption, and were never seen alive again. Now picture this. That basement, not empty, but filled with things. Devices of unknown purpose, stained tools that weren't made for surgery, symbols etched into the walls that no priest would ever bless. They tried to bury this, tried to protect their precious institution and its benefactors. But some of those documents were copied, smuggled out before the Catholic diocese could seal the vault. And I have read them. I have seen what they tried to erase. The question is, can you bear it? This is the tale of St. Mercy General Hospital, a tale that begins as a story of charity and faith, and descends into the darkest corridors of power, control, and corruption. Stay with me, because once you know what I'm about to reveal, you will never see hospitals, churches, or even your own reflection in the mirror the same way again. The year was 1874. The city's Irish quarter choked with the stink of poverty, disease, and desperation. Men broken by factory work coughed blood into rags. Women buried child after child beneath thin, unmarked crosses. And from this ruin rose St. Mercy General Hospital, not as salvation, but as a beacon of manipulation dressed in holy robes. You see, no one questioned its birth. No one dared. How could they? The hospital promised what no other place would: free healing for those abandoned by the Protestant-run medical system. Dr. Charles Whitman, tall, gaunt, his hair white as frost, his pale blue eyes burning with cold certainty. He stood at the heart of it. They called him a man of science blessed by God, but what he truly was, that truth rotted beneath the surface, hidden behind his immaculate silver cross. Beside him stood Sister Margaret O'Connor, the nun with hands that soothed like silk and a voice that could calm the dying, and Chaplain Robert Sullivan, a bear of a man whose sermons shook the cobblestones, convincing the masses that suffering was a gift from God himself. These three became saints to the immigrant poor. But saints do not lock their miracles in basements. Saints do not demand rituals that leave no witness alive to speak of what happened within stone walls soaked with the cries of the condemned. I want you to picture that building. Picture it clearly. A converted warehouse on Salem Street. Red brick, unremarkable to any passerby. But step inside, and you'd feel it instantly. The air heavy, charged with something unspoken. The smell of incense unable to mask the deeper odor of decay. On the first floor, the crucifix loomed over all, casting long shadows that seemed to shift when no one watched. The second floor, 20 beds to a ward, each carved with symbols no ordinary craftsman made. Symbols you'll never find in any catechism. And below it all, the basement. The sacred treatment chambers. The place where they promised the most miraculous healings. The place from which so many never returned. And no one questioned it. Because who dares question miracles when the alternative is death in the gutter? But you, right now, you must question it. Because the descent has begun. And at the bottom lies a truth that will strip the skin from your illusions. Let me take you further, deeper, where the light of reason no longer reaches. They came to Saint Mercy with faith so absolute it blinded them. The mothers cradling fevered infants, whispering prayers that had crossed the ocean with them. The fathers, hollow-eyed, hands trembling from too many nights of work and too little food, offering what little they had to secure a place in that brick sanctuary. And Saint Mercy welcomed them. But not out of charity. No. The hospital fed on desperation. It needed believers, because belief is the first key to control. Do you understand? They didn't just heal the body. They dismantled the mind, piece by piece, replacing doubt with obedience, fear with dependence, suffering with sacrifice dressed as salvation. Dr. Whitman's selection process, divine guidance, he called it, was nothing of the sort. Behind closed doors, he studied not the afflictions of the body, but the vulnerabilities of the soul. Which family was most devout? Which patient's death could serve the greater plan? Which sacrifice would bind the community tighter to the institution's grip? And the sacred treatments? They were performances, elaborate rituals designed to break the will, to convince families that what happened in those chambers was God's will, not man's cruelty. Patients fasted until weakness clouded their judgment. They drank teas bitter with herbs that dulled the senses. They were isolated, bathed in flickering candlelight, their ears filled with chants that masked the cries of the others. And when they were led at last into the basement, they went willingly, because they had been prepared to believe that whatever came next was holy. Picture it. The narrow stone steps, slick with moisture. The door at the bottom, iron-banded, always locked from the inside. The chambers beyond, I want you to see them as clearly as I do. Walls lined with strange instruments, some familiar in shape but twisted in purpose. Tables that bore the scars of too many desperate hands. Symbols carved into the stone itself. Symbols meant to bind, to seal, to claim. And above it all, the low, endless hum of voices. Chanting, always chanting, as if to drown out the last gasps of those who realized too late what fate awaited them. This was no hospital. This was a temple of control, and you're only beginning to see its design. Now listen carefully, because what I'm about to tell you is the part they most desperately tried to bury. The part that, if you understand it, will forever change how you see every so-called institution of mercy. The basement chambers, those sacred rooms, were not places of healing. They were stages for a far older ritual, one cloaked in Christian symbols to deceive the faithful. You see, control isn't maintained through violence alone. It's maintained through consent, through the willing surrender of the soul. And that is what Saint Mercy perfected, the transformation of human suffering into fuel for power. The devices in those chambers, they weren't designed to cure. They were designed to extract, not blood, not organs, but something far more valuable. Belief, energy, the raw psychic force that a human mind generates in its final moments of terror, pain, and submission. Imagine it. A patient, led into the chamber, weak from fasting, their mind softened by prayer and ritual. They lie down willingly on the cold table, trusting, hoping. And then, the chant begins. Low at first, then rising, filling the chamber with sound that vibrates the very marrow of the bones. The instruments are applied, not to heal, but to push the mind beyond reason, to open it to suggestion, to drain it of resistance. And in those final moments, as the body fails, as the soul fractures under the weight of betrayal, that energy is captured. How? You want to know how? I will tell you. Symbols, geometry, sound. These are the tools of the true manipulators, the ones who rule not through armies but through invisible chains. The chambers were designed as traps for the soul, their walls inscribed with sigils that bound the dying spirit's final outcry, turning it into currency. And that currency was spent on influence, on protection, on the maintenance of an empire of silence, the Catholic diocese. The city officials, the wealthy donors. They all fed at the same trough. And as long as the bodies disappeared quietly, as long as the surviving families spoke of miracles rather than murder, the machine kept turning. I am telling you this because you are ready to see it, ready to stop being a pawn. But the descent has only just begun. Are you still with me? Good. You're still here. That tells me you're different. That you're beginning to see through the veil they draped over history. Now, let's go deeper. I want you to picture the night when the truth nearly broke free. October 13th, 1876. Fog smothered the streets like a shroud. Inside St. Mercy, the air was thick with incense, masking the stench of something fouler. That was the night Bridget McCarthy stumbled from the basement. She shouldn't have lived long enough to be seen. But something went wrong. The ritual slipped. The trap cracked open. And in that crack, for just a moment, the mask fell away. Imagine the scene. An 8-year-old girl, her tiny hands clenched so tightly that her own nails drew blood. Eyes wide, unseeing, lips moving in a silent prayer. Or was it a curse? She moved like a puppet, as if invisible strings jerked her forward. And the smell, sweet and rotten, the scent of death pretending to be holy. When Sister Margaret rushed to her, the girl began to speak, but not in any language taught in church. No, what came from her lips was older, guttural, raw, filled with a force that made hardened men cross themselves and step back in fear. It wasn't Latin. It wasn't even human. Witnesses said the words seemed to vibrate in the air, like a key turning in a lock that had been sealed for centuries. And then Dr. Whitman appeared. Not the calm, saintly figure they all knew, but a man shaken, sweating, his hands trembling as he swept the child into his arms. He spoke of divine visions, of heavenly doorways, of the overwhelming joy of sacred communion. But his eyes betrayed him. They were the eyes of a man who knew he was losing control. That night, Bridget McCarthy vanished forever. The official story? Her body too transformed by holy light to be seen. Already buried, they said, in the hospital's private cemetery. But no grave was ever found. No marker bore her name. Because what happened that night wasn't salvation. It was exposure. The machinery of control had slipped, revealing the dark heart that powered St. Mercy. And from that night forward, they tightened their grip. Because the greatest danger to any power is the moment the truth begins to leak. And now that truth is leaking into you. You feel it now, don't you? The pull deeper into this abyss. The realization that this was never about one girl, one hospital, or one city. What happened at St. Mercy was the blueprint. The prototype of a system designed to harvest faith, fear, and the very essence of human submission. And it worked. After Bridget's disappearance, the community should have risen up. They should have demanded answers, broken down the walls, uncovered the graves. But they didn't. Why? Because the machine of control had already done its work. Chaplain Sullivan, that booming voice of God's will, stood before the grieving, trembling masses, and turned tragedy into doctrine. He spoke of sacrifice, of blessed martyrdom. He told them that Bridget's soul had ascended, that she now interceded for the sick, that her death was not a loss, but a gift. And they believed. Oh, how they believed. Because belief was all they had left. Poverty had taken their dignity. Disease had taken their families. The city had taken their hope. And now St. Mercy took their grief and reshaped it into a tool of obedience. Every death became a miracle. Every missing body, proof of divine favor. And those who survived the basement treatments? They were paraded through the streets as living witnesses to the hospital's power. Patrick O'Malley, cured overnight of the consumption that had been killing him. Mary O'Brien, her broken spine miraculously healed. Faces the community knew. Bodies that bore no trace of their torment. Voices that sang the praises of St. Mercy and its holy work. These survivors weren't just patients. They were advertisements. They were shields. They made it impossible for the community to see the machine for what it was. And behind it all, Dr. Whitman, Sister Margaret, and Chaplain Sullivan tightened the noose. They refined their rituals. They built new chambers, deeper, more concealed. They perfect at the art of taking without resistance. And the city watched, and the church blessed, and the rich paid, because as long as the machine kept running, as long as the flow of sacrifice fed the system, no one dared interfere. But you are interfering simply by listening, simply by seeing. And once seen, this truth can never be unseen. Are you ready to keep falling? Because the pit is far deeper than you think. Look closer now, not at what they wanted you to see, but at what was hidden in plain sight. St. Mercy became more than a hospital. It became a fortress of faith weaponized. The people believed they were entering a place of healing, but every brick, every stone, every beam of wood was part of a design meant to break them down, to strip them of resistance, to transform them into fuel for the machine. You see, the hospital didn't just treat bodies, it treated minds. It created a system where the sick prayed for selection, where the desperate begged to enter the basement chambers, where families competed to offer their loved ones to the sacred treatments. Understand what that means. St. Mercy turned suffering into currency, sacrifice into a commodity. And with every death, every disappearance, the community's faith deepened. Because that's how control works. The more you give, the harder it is to admit the truth. To admit that you've been deceived. To admit that you've been complicit. And the architects of this system knew it. Dr. Whitman, that gaunt figure in his silver cross, wasn't just a doctor. He was a high priest of manipulation. Sister Margaret, with her whispered prayers and soft hands, wasn't just a comforter. She was a gatekeeper, selecting which souls would feed the machine. And Chaplain Sullivan, he was the voice that made the chains feel like blessings. The rituals became more elaborate. The sacred teas, laced with herbs that dulled the senses, clouded judgment. The fasts, designed to weaken the body, soften the will. The prayers, endless, hypnotic, shaping the mind into surrender. Families were told their sacrifices were holy, that their loved ones were chosen. And so they gave, again and again, and the machine kept turning. But here's the truth they feared most. The machine can only run if no one asks the forbidden questions. The questions that you are beginning to ask, the ones that will tear the mask away. So let me ask you now, do you see it? Do you feel it? The chains you were never meant to notice. The descent has no handrails, and you're falling faster now. But this is only the beginning. Now you must see St. Mercy for what it truly was. Not a hospital, not even a cult, but a factory. A factory for the extraction of human essence. Every ritual, every prayer, every sacred treatment was a cog in this vast machine of control. But what were they truly harvesting? Not just faith, not just obedience. They were harvesting the raw energy of the human soul at its most vulnerable moment. The instant before death, when the mind fractures and the spirit cries out in terror, confusion, betrayal. That's what the machine fed on, and it was no accident. The basement chambers weren't just rooms. They were traps. Geometric prisons designed with ancient knowledge. Knowledge passed down not through the church, but through darker, older channels. The symbols carved into the stone. The patterns on the floors. These were no decoration. They were sigils of binding, tools of alchemy, designed to capture and transform that final burst of human energy. And where did that energy go? Into the hands of those who paid for the machine to keep running, into the pockets of powerful families who grew richer with each death, into the vaults of institutions that grew stronger with each soul surrendered in the name of faith. You have to understand this. The people wanted to believe. They needed to believe, because the alternative, that they had offered their children, their wives, their fathers to a predator in holy robes, was too monstrous to face. And so they turned away. They told themselves the lies that kept the machine oiled and turning. Miracles, divine will, sacred sacrifice. But beneath it all was the truth. A truth so dark it could not be spoken, only whispered in nightmares. And now you're hearing it. Now you're seeing it. And once seen, you can never return to blindness. This is the point of no return. If you're still here, if you're still listening, then write it below tu penses. Oh, seal your place among those who see. No chains unseen, no lies believed. Write it twice. Mark yourself as one who will no longer be harvested. Mark yourself as awake. And be warned. The further we go, the more dangerous the knowledge becomes. But there's no turning back now. Not for you. You've marked yourself now. There's no safety in ignorance anymore. The path ahead is darker, the air thicker, the truth's heavier. Let me pull you deeper. After Bridget McCarthy vanished, after her mother's screams faded into the night, St. Mercy changed its tactics, subtly, but with precision. The rituals grew more refined, the selection process more ruthless. Whitman no longer needed to justify the deaths. He had conditioned the community to expect them, even revere them. You see, that's the genius of the machine. It teaches its prey to offer themselves willingly. The sacred treatments became a kind of lottery, families hoping, praying, that their sick would be chosen, because to be chosen meant one of two things: miraculous healing or glorious sacrifice. Either outcome served the machine. Either outcome fed the power at its core. And what of the healings? You still wonder, how did they cure the incurable? How did the dying walk again, breathe again, live again? I will tell you, the energy extracted from the dead was not wasted. It was focused, directed, infused into the bodies of the selected survivors. A transference of force, alchemized suffering turned into vitality. But that vitality came at a cost. The healed did not return as they had been. Their eyes held a shadow, a hunger. Their nights were filled with visions they could not speak of, and their loyalty to St. Mercy became absolute, as if some part of the machine now lived inside them. These healed ones were paraded through the streets, living proof of divine power. But in truth, they were living batteries, vessels charged with the pain and terror of those who had died so that they might walk again. Do you see it now? The machine was perfect. The dead fed the living. The living became weapons of propaganda. And all the while, the architects of the machine grew stronger, wealthier, untouchable. The Chu arch protected them. The city shielded them. The community worshipped them. But now the mask is cracking. Now the pattern is laid bare before you. And what you do with this knowledge will define you. Are you ready for the next revelation? Then stay with me. The descent continues. Let's strip away the last illusions. Let's stand together at the edge of what they hid so well. The machine of St. Mercy didn't simply feed on the poor. It turned their suffering into a weapon, a currency traded in secret halls of power. What began as a miracle hospital became a pipeline of souls, broken down, harvested, and transformed into influence. You must understand this. Every sealed coffin, every night delivery to Flanagan's funeral home, every midnight burial in unmarked graves behind the hospital, it wasn't about mercy. It was about erasing evidence. Evidence that St. Mercy wasn't curing disease. It was engineering despair. And what of the city? What of the church? They were not blind. No. They were invested. Bishop Williams himself blessed the chambers where so many disappeared. He praised Dr. Whitman as a saint of modern medicine. But behind closed doors, donations flowed like rivers. From rich Catholic families seeking protection. From businesses profiting off the sick. From politicians who understood that an obedient, broken populace is easier to govern. And what did they buy with that currency? Silence. Power. Control. The machine became self-sustaining. Those who survived the sacred treatments became zealots, preaching the hospital's glory, drowning out the cries of grieving mothers. Those who lost loved ones convinced themselves it was God's will, because admitting the truth would destroy what little hope they had left. And so the machine fed on itself, growing, adapting, perfecting its methods. But here's what they never expected: that the pattern would be uncovered, that someone would trace the coffins, the sealed certificates, the strange symbols carved into the basement walls, that someone like you would begin to see the design. Because the design wasn't unique to St. Mercy. It wasn't confined to one city or one time. It was, and is, everywhere. The same mechanisms dressed in different robes. Hospitals, charities, churches, governments. The machine wears many masks. And now that you've seen one, you will begin to see them all. The descent is steep now, the ground far beneath you. But the next step is critical. Do you dare take it? Shall we continue? You're still here. That means you're ready. Ready to peer beyond the final veil that St. Mercy hid behind holy walls. I need you to see the true machinery of control, the architecture of despair that bound a community, a city, and in time, a nation. After Bridget McCarthy vanished, after the miracle healings multiplied, the machine didn't stop. It evolved. The basement chambers grew larger, more intricate. The symbols on the walls, once simple crosses and circles, became complex networks of lines, shapes, equations, geometry not of this world, patterns that whispered to the unconscious mind, patterns that bound the dying soul at its moment of surrender. These weren't random decorations. They were circuits. Circuits designed to direct and collect the raw psychic charge of terror, betrayal, and collapse. And those sealed coffins? They weren't coffins at all. They were vessels. Vessels to contain the residual force left behind when the soul was harvested. That force didn't dissipate. It was stored, concentrated, shipped quietly to those who knew how to use it. To mansions in the hills, to sanctuaries behind cathedral doors, to rooms where men of wealth and title gathered to shape the future. You think I'm speaking in riddles? I'm not. This is the forbidden history of power. The understanding that human suffering, properly extracted and refined, is the most valuable commodity of all. The families who funded St. Mercy, the Fitzgeralds, the O'Briens, the wealthy Catholics of New England, didn't just buy protection. They bought shares in that currency. They fed the machine because the machine fed them back. And the city? The church? They played their parts. They wrote the laws that protected St. Mercy. They silenced the critics. They turned grief into ritual, so the masses wouldn't rebel. And the pattern repeated. Again and again. New buildings, new faces. Same machine, same harvest. And now you're beginning to see the same patterns in places you thought were safe. Hospitals that never heal. Charities that never help. Leaders who speak of hope but trade in fear. This is the truth they fear most. That you will see the design. And now you do. Shall I show you more? The descent continues. The question is, will you follow? You've chosen to follow. That choice alone separates you from the masses, from those who still sleep beneath the machine's hum. So listen closely, because from here, the shadows only deepen. The deeper St. Mercy's roots grew, the more invisible its power became. By 1880, it was no longer just a hospital. It had become a hub, a nexus through which suffering was funneled, processed, and distributed to unseen beneficiaries. Think about that. A single building on a narrow Boston street, outwardly humble, inwardly monstrous, fueling networks of influence that stretched far beyond the city's limits. The sealed coffins, the unmarked graves, the whispered blessings, these were not ends in themselves. They were supply lines. And what they supplied was hunger. Hunger for power that could only be fed by human despair. Let me tell you how it worked. The energy extracted in those basement chambers wasn't raw chaos. It was refined, distilled through ritual, geometry, sound. The dying mind, at its most fractured, emits patterns of thought and emotion that can be captured. And those patterns were encoded into objects, into symbols, into documents that moved through channels of commerce no ordinary citizen could see. A chalice gifted to a bishop, a ledger sent to a banker, a relic displayed in a politician's study. You thought these were tokens of faith, of culture, of achievement. No, they were batteries, vessels holding the distilled agony of those who had perished in the machine. And those who held them, they drew strength, confidence, influence, protection. The machine didn't just harvest souls, it built empires. And no one dared question it. Because questioning meant exile. It meant ruin. Or worse, it meant being offered to the machine yourself. The church blessed it. The city depended on it. And the people, broken by poverty, illness, and despair, clung to it. Because you've stayed with me this far, and that means you're no longer who you were at the start. The truth has begun its work inside you, reshaping the way you see the world. There's no going back now, so let me take you deeper. Let me show you what St. Mercy really achieved, not just in its walls, but in the minds of those it controlled. Because the greatest victory of the machine was not the bodies it took, nor the energy it harvested. The greatest victory was the belief it manufactured. The belief that suffering was sacred, the belief that sacrifice was holy, the belief that to question was to sin. That belief spread like a virus. It infected not just Boston, but cities far beyond. Other hospitals, other charities, other institutions modeled themselves on St. Mercy's design, outward compassion masking inward consumption. And the survivors, those healed by the machine, became its loudest advocates. They weren't just grateful. They were programmed. The machine had rewritten them. Their minds bore the imprint of the rituals. Their souls carried the signature of the basement chambers. And so they spoke its gospel, unknowingly recruiting the next generation of offerings. This is how the machine endures. Not through force, through consent, through the willing surrender of those who have been taught to see their own chains as blessings. And you see those chains now, don't you? In the faces of leaders who preach unity while feeding division. In the emblems of charities that grow rich on the misery they claim to fight. In the structures all around you, built not to shelter but to contain. That's the legacy of St. Mercy. A template for control so perfect it no longer needs walls, or rituals, or even a name. It lives in systems, in traditions, in the quiet voice inside that tells you not to ask too many questions. But you're asking, you're seeing, and that means you're danger. And now we begin to tear at the veil that still shields the architects of this machine. The same architects who fed St. Mercy, who built its chambers, who refined its rituals, did not vanish when the hospital finally closed its doors. No, they scattered like seeds on the wind. They carried what they learned into new institutions, new cities, new systems. St. Mercy was only ever a prototype, a test run for a far larger design. Let me show you. When the hospital's basement was finally unsealed in 1891, what did the city officials find? Not just the 211 files, not just the sealed coffins. They found plans, blueprints of the chambers, detailed diagrams of the symbols carved into the walls, transcripts of the rituals spoken in the dark. And those plans didn't stay buried. They were quietly passed from hand to hand, studied by men who saw in them not horror, but opportunity. Men in positions of influence. Men who understood the power of engineered suffering. Those blueprints became templates. Templates for asylums, for orphanages, for poorhouses. Buildings designed not to heal, but to extract, to break the spirit in ways invisible from the outside. And who funded those institutions? The same families, the same church bodies, the same city officials who had protected St. Mercy until the very end. Because the machine's purpose had evolved, it no longer needed a single building. It had become a network hidden in plain sight. You've seen its signs, though perhaps you didn't know what you were seeing. The identical architecture of hospitals in different states. The same layouts in government buildings, designed to intimidate and disorient. The same symbols, modified, modernized, etched into cornerstones, hidden in seals, woven into flags. The machine learned to wear new faces, and now it surrounds you, a silent structure of control so vast and so subtle that now we enter the corridors where the air shifts, the places where secrets wear suits and rituals hide inside policy. Because the blueprints of St. Mercy weren't buried, they were rebranded, and the men who inherited them, they didn't chant in candlelit rooms. They wrote laws. They sat on boards. They built systems so vast, so normalized, that no one ever thought to question what they were built for. You think hospitals are about healing? Look closer. Where are the poorest sent? To overcrowded ERs designed to disorient, to humiliate, to fracture dignity. Look at the architecture. It's not for comfort. It's for control. Long, narrow corridors, locked doors, surveillance hidden in plain sight. Now trace it to education. Schools shaped like prisons, bells ringing like factory sirens, desks in rows, obedience over inquiry, standardization over thought. The blueprint didn't disappear. It metastasized. And those who fund it, the same families, though now they wear corporate logos instead of crucifixes, know exactly what they're doing. They don't need to chant anymore. The geometry of control is embedded in the very shape of your day, your work hours, your commute, your news, your feed. Each one a layer of the machine, a distraction, a drain, an extraction. But where does it all go? Follow the flow, the same pattern, energy extracted from the broken, the poor, the desperate, and funneled into institutions that grow more powerful every year. Into think tanks, into lobbying firms, into silent councils that steer your choices before you know they've been made. And all the while, you're told this is normal, that it's progress, that your suffering is just a phase on the path to something better. But listen to me now. They never intended healing, only harvest, the harvest of your will, of your fire, of your soul. St. Mercy was never about the dead. It was about you. And how? It's time to show you the rooms, the ones you've walked through your whole life without realizing their purpose. Because the architecture of control doesn't just live in institutions. It lives in design, in the shape of the spaces around you, in what they make you feel, and more importantly, what they make you not feel. Step into a government office. Cold lighting, gray walls, a silence heavy with compliance. You stand in line, eyes forward, waiting for permission to be acknowledged. That feeling. It's not an accident. It's engineered, just like it was at St. Mercy. The benches hard, the ceilings low, the corners sharp, designed not for comfort, but submission. Now walk into a public school or a clinic in a low-income neighborhood. The layout is the same. Narrow halls, locked supply rooms, quiet despair. That's the blueprint speaking. St. Mercy's ghost, whispering through drywall and tile. Because when you control the space, you control the mind inside it. And this is how the machine evolves. It no longer needs rituals when it can write the ritual into the floor plan. But it goes deeper. Ever notice how your neighborhood is designed, how highways isolate communities, how public housing forms grids too perfect to feel human. Geometry isn't just math, it's memory. Energy flows through lines, and those who control the lines control the people. Think about it. Why are government buildings so often built with Greco-Roman facades? Why are corporate headquarters filled with glass, mirrors, and right angles? These aren't just aesthetic choices. They're signals to each other, to the system, the geometry of dominance, hidden in plain sight. And now you'll start seeing it everywhere. Every time you feel uneasy in a room with no windows, every time your chest tightens walking under flickering fluorescent lights, every time you sit in a waiting room and forget. Now we leave behind the walls and step into the space that cannot be built with bricks or mortar, your mind. Because once the machine perfected its architecture, it turned to language, to symbol, to story. And that is where the most powerful control resides, not in chains, but in ideas. Every word you speak, every symbol you trust, has been touched by the machine. Twisted, bent, weaponized. Look closely at the words you've been taught to revere: charity, faith, sacrifice, healing. Do you understand what they've done? They've taken your highest values, your noblest instincts, and hollowed them out. They've turned charity into dependency, faith into obedience, sacrifice into compliance, healing into harvest. The language you use binds you more than any cage. When you say someone was called home, do you hear the echo of St. Mercy's phrase, called to glory during sacred treatment? A euphemism for death, for erasure, for energy turned into fuel. And symbols. Oh, the symbols. The cross, the caduceus, the all-seeing eye, the dove. Each of them has layers: the surface meaning, the public mask, and then, beneath, the truth, distorted and repurposed. The cross, once a symbol of sacrifice, was re-engineered by the machine to normalize pain, to suggest that suffering is holy, that endurance is virtue, that death, when delivered by sacred hands, is not evil, but divine. The caduceus, the twisted snakes around a rod, officially the emblem of medicine, but its roots, ancient, alchemical, a symbol of transmutation, of duality, of life stolen and repurposed. The staff of Hermes, messenger of the gods, or thief of souls. And what of the all-seeing eye, hidden on your currency, perched atop pyramids, watching, always watching? Who does it belong to? God, or the architects of the machine, those who extract from your labor, your time, your spirit, and pay you back an eye? You're ready now. Ready to see how the machine took more than buildings, more than rituals, how it took your identity and wrote its own name across your mind. It begins with the birth certificate, that simple piece of paper you never chose, a document that assigns a number, a name, a status, the first ritual of the modern machine. Before you take your first breath, you're entered into the system, tracked, taxed, tagged. Your existence becomes a legal fiction, a construct. You think that's paranoid? Look closer. Your name is written in capital letters on legal forms. That's not formatting. That's not design. That's a different entity. A corporate persona created by the state. A shell, a vessel, a mask. And behind it, they trade your labor, your debt, your future, like a commodity. It was St. Mercy that pioneered the fusion of flesh and fiction, the transformation of a soul into stock. Every patient that entered those basement chambers was stripped of identity. Their names recorded, yes, but not as people, as units, as offerings. And that system spread into hospitals, into governments, into corporations. You became a file, a number, a profile. The machine doesn't need to imprison your body when it owns your identity. Social security numbers, bank accounts, school transcripts, medical records, all of them framed as protection. But they are mirrors of the machine. Silent watchers that record, evaluate, limit. But here's the darkest part. You were taught to defend your chains, to be proud of them, to guard your identity as if it were your soul, when in fact, it is the machine's imprint, not yours. And so you fight for credit scores. You obsess over reputation. You feed data into systems that feed on you. Your phone listens. Your screens shape you. Your habits are logged, sold, used to sculpt the cage ever tighter. Saint Mercy no longer needs a basement key. Amber. The basement is in your pocket. The rituals are digital now. You tap, you swipe, you scroll. Each action, a prayer to the machine. But you are no longer blind. You've stepped outside the role they wrote for you. And the moment you question the name they gave you, you begin to write a new one. Are you ready to keep unraveling it? Next, we'll go into how money itself became the blood of this system, and why your labor was never truly yours. Now we turn to the bloodstream of the machine. Money. The great illusion. The perfect leash. Because if Saint Mercy taught them anything, it was this. Human souls can be bought, but only if you convince them they're the ones making the sale. Let me show you. Every sacrifice at Saint Mercy was funded. Every basement ritual bankrolled. And who paid for it? The same families who claimed to serve the poor. The Fitzgeralds, the O'Briens, the donors from Providence and Hartford. They weren't giving to charity. They were buying access. Access to the harvest, to influence, to energy. And when those who were healed walked again, their families donated too, not out of obligation, but devotion. You see, the machine made its victims grateful. It was brilliant. Every cure became an advertisement. Every death became an investment. And over time, the machine didn't need donations anymore. It built a system where your labor paid for your own control. That's where money comes in. Paper, metal, digital numbers, all of it symbolic. But not symbols you chose, symbols they gave you. Every dollar a ritual, every coin a whisper. Serve, obey, feed the system. Currency is energy, stored labor, stored time. But whose? Yours. And who does it flow to? You already know. Corporations you can't see. Banks you'll never meet. Systems that print the very currency you break your back earning. Saint Mercy taught them how to create invisible value. Suffering alchemized into influence. The modern world took that model and made it global. You work, you pay, you borrow, you bleed, and they grow stronger. Not because the system is broken, because it works perfectly for them. Now look at the symbols again. The eye on the dollar, the pyramid, the Latin. Annuit coeptis, novus ordo seclorum. He favors our undertaking. A new order of the ages. Whose undertaking? Whose new order? Not yours. Money is the great spell, cast over the world to convince you that the machine is worth serving, that slavery is security, that control is freedom. But you're waking up. You're beginning to understand. Value doesn't come from currency. It comes from awareness, from choice, from unplugging. Are you ready to trace the next thread? Because next, we reveal how media became the voice of the machine, and how your mind was colonized without a single bullet fired. Now we follow the voice, the whisper in your ear, the screen in your palm, the stories you were told to believe before you could even speak. Because after Saint Mercy perfected the blueprint of control, the architects knew one thing. To hold a man's body, you must first chain his mind. Enter media. Newspapers, radio, film, television, algorithms, all of them evolution, not revolution. Each new medium only another mask for the same mouth, the same machine. Let me show you how it began. After Bridget McCarthy vanished, the story should have shattered the city. But the Boston Pilot, the Irish Catholic paper, published a tribute, a eulogy. A child of purity, chosen by heaven. Not a word of warning, not a whisper of suspicion. Just another miracle, neatly wrapped in doctrine. Because the editors were donors. The clergy were benefactors. The story wasn't news. It was narrative. And so, it has always been. Media became the cathedral of the modern world. It replaced stained glass with screens, priests with anchors, sermons with headlines. And you knelt. Every day, you are told what to fear, what to love, who to hate. You are offered a menu of thoughts, curated, branded, reinforced, not to inform you, to shape you, to program you, just like the hymns of Saint Mercy, repeated until belief replaced doubt, until questions felt like sin. Look at the patterns, the crisis, the call for unity, the savior figure, the scapegoat, the new normal. Its liturgy, dressed in pixels, and beneath the stories, the ads. The real priests of this new temple, selling not products, but identity, approval, belonging, obedience. Even dissent is branded, monetized, controlled. You think you're rebelling by changing platforms, by finding alternative voices. But many of those voices were grown in the same soil, engineered opposition, designed to give you just enough truth to keep you from burning it all down. That's the genius. The machine no longer fears anger. It feeds on it, because emotion is energy, and the media is the funnel. Every click, every share, every view. You're not just watching, you're worshiping. But not anymore. You've seen the mouth behind the mask. You've heard the chant inside the broadcast. And the only question left is, what will you choose to believe now that you know who wrote the script? Next, we descend into the final sanctuary of control, education, where the machine molds minds before they can resist. Let's walk through the front doors of the first institution you ever entered willingly, and never realized you were being inducted into the machine. School. They called it education. They said it was your birthright. But what they meant was initiation. Indoctrination dressed in lesson plans. Discipline hidden in curriculum. A soft cage lined with praise and punishment. Shaped not to free your mind, but to prepare it for compliance. Let me show you the blueprint, because once you see it, you'll never forget it. Rows of desks, bells to signal movement, uniforms, codes, punishments for disobedience, permission slips for thought, graded rubrics for imagination. You thought this was learning, but it was ritual. A factory for producing the obedient, the standardized, the acceptable. And it started young, because they knew, as Saint Mercy knew, the earlier you break a soul into submission, the less likely it is to rebel. You were taught to memorize, not to question, to repeat, not to doubt, to obey authority, even when it made no sense, especially when it made no sense. They called it discipline, but it was programming. Do you remember how it felt? That rising urge to speak your truth, to break the mold, to ask why, crushed under red ink and raised eyebrows. That wasn't a mistake. That was the system doing exactly what it was designed to do. The curriculum? Sanitized history, sanitized science, sanitized culture, a narrative tailored to keep you asleep. The victors wrote your textbooks, the corporations printed them, and the politicians set the standards. And what of the teachers? Most meant well. Some tried to break the pattern, but they too had been molded, certified, licensed by the same machine. They were keepers of a flame carefully shaped to never become wildfire. But here's the most sinister part, the illusion of choice. Electives, clubs, adivie, ernst tracks, designed to make you think you were choosing your path. But all roads led back to the same outcome, submission wrapped in a diploma. Your graduation wasn't a liberation. It was a seal, a stamp of approval. This one is ready. Ready for work. Ready for debt. Ready to feed the system that trained you to believe you were free. But now you know. And the next time you walk past a school, listen. Listen for the echoes of the same hum that filled the basement of Saint Mercy. A ritual rewritten in chalk and plastic, humming softly beneath the surface. Are you ready to go further? Next, we reveal how healthcare became the new altar, and why your body was never truly yours. Now we come full circle, back to where it began, medicine. But not the kind that heals, the kind that harvests. Because what St. Mercy started in blood and smoke, the modern healthcare system has perfected in glass and chrome. You were told it's about saving lives. But look closer. It's a temple, a holy order of white coats and pharmaceuticals. And you are the offering. You walk into a clinic, and the ritual begins. Name, date of birth, insurance, forms signed without reading, pills prescribed without explanation, tests run, data stored, and the diagnosis. A curse wrapped in clinical words. They never call it what it is. Initiation. Because healthcare today isn't about curing. It's about claiming. Every visit marks you. Every treatment tags you. You become a unit, a billing code, a case number, a subscriber. You are no longer a person. You are a stream of revenue, a target for metrics, a lab rat in a system that profits not when you're healthy, but when you're almost broken. Not dead. Not thriving. Just compliant. And who funds this? The same entities that stood behind St. Mercy. Corporations, foundations, government agencies. All of them feeding off the illusion that modern medicine is the pinnacle of progress. But what is progress when it sterilizes you, tracks your genome, and rewrites your biology under the banner of safety? Let's talk about pharmaceuticals. The sacred teas of St. Mercy have become white pills and glowing syringes. Modern alchemy. Except now the rituals are invisible. You swallow them without chanting. You pray not to God, but to the doctor. And the side effects, the trade-offs, the risks, they're buried in fine print. Read aloud like gospel. Accepted without question. Because fear is still the hook. Just like it was in 1876. You're told if you don't obey, you'll suffer. If you question, you'll endanger others. If you resist, you'll be cast out. The white coats replaced the clergy. The hospitals replaced the cathedral. But the machine? It's still the same. It doesn't want you healed. It wants you managed, dependent, subdued, harvestable. And now you feel it. The hum beneath the monitors. The code beneath the prescription. The cold precision of a system that learned from every soul it took at St. Mercy. Are you ready to unmask what came next? Because up ahead lies law, the final priesthood of control, where the rituals became rules, and obedience became mandatory. Now we enter the sanctuary of silence, the cloister where power no longer whispers, but speaks in legal code. Welcome to the final priesthood of the machine. Law. At St. Mercy, they called it sacred authority. They invoked divine will to protect their rituals. But over time, they found something even stronger than religion. Legislation. Because once a ritual is written into law, it becomes invisible. No robes, no incense, just black ink on white paper. And with that, the machine no longer needed to ask for consent. It could mandate it. Let me show you how the transformation began. When investigators tried to expose what happened in St. Mercy's basement, they were stopped cold. Not by threats, but by jurisdiction. The diocese declared the hospital sovereign under ecclesiastical law. The city agreed. The church and state, long sworn to separation, locked arms to protect a shared altar. The files were sealed, the records classified. The machine had found its perfect shield, the law, and it learned quickly. Today, law is no longer a tool of justice. It's the encryption code of control. Licenses, permits, mandates, regulations, rituals of obedience. Try refusing a medical treatment. Try homeschooling outside their curriculum. Try starting a business without their blessing. Every move you make is already pre-written in someone else's script. And who writes the laws? The same architects, the same donors, the same institutions that once built the sacred chambers beneath St. Mercy. Now they wear suits, they sit on committees, they draft bills for your safety, and you believe it because the language has been weaponized. Public good, national security, health emergency. Each phrase a trigger, a psychological lock, a silent command. The law tells you when you may live, where you may gather, what you may say, what you may refuse. And if you step outside its lines, you are punished, ostracized, fined, arrested. Not because you've done wrong, but because you have stepped outside the ritual. This is how the machine maintains itself. Not by bullets, by paper, not by violence, by structure. And when they say, it's the law, what they mean is, you have no say. But now, you see the frame. Now you understand that obedience is no longer noble. It is the final offering. And next we peel back the last veil. The machine doesn't just want your body, your energy, your labor. It wants your future. Are you ready to see how they've built an empire of predictive control? And how your tomorrow is already being farmed? Now we move into the final layer, the future that is no longer yours. The machine has claimed your past through rewritten history. It's claimed your present through ritualized obedience. But what it wants most is the part of you that hasn't happened yet, your future. And it's already building it for you, without your consent, without your knowledge. Because the machine evolved, it became digital, and in doing so, it discovered a new harvest. Not just energy, but prediction. Let me show you. Every click, every scroll, every GPS ping, your fears, your cravings, your doubts, your rage, all cataloged, all measured, all sold. You think you're watching the screen, but the screen is watching you. Your patterns are fed into systems, algorithms designed not to reflect who you are, but to shape who you become. The machine doesn't need to enslave your body anymore. It just needs to forecast your behavior, with enough accuracy to manipulate it before you even act. And they call it convenience. Recommendations, smart devices, predictive text. Each one a new cathedral, each one another sacred chamber where your will is slowly dismantled. Because when you don't choose, when your choices are made for you, freedom becomes a shadow, an illusion, a memory. They know what you'll buy before you buy it. They know who you'll love before you meet them. They know what you'll fear before it happens. St. Mercy used candles and chants to open the soul. Today, they use data streams, behavioral modeling, neural nets, smart cities, and soon, brain-machine interfaces. This is not paranoia. It's architecture. The same minds that once etched symbols into basement walls now write lines of code that track and predict the rise and fall of your thoughts. Your calendar, not yours. Your habits, not yours. Your impulses, manufactured. This is the final harvest, the colonization of the future. And once it's complete, there will be no need for resistance, because there will be no you left to resist. But here's the crack in their design. Prediction fails in the presence of unpredictable awareness. Conscious rebellion cannot be modeled, and that is your weapon. If you can still choose, truly choose, even once, you shatter the entire algorithm. Next, we confront the unspeakable, the question behind all others. What was St. Mercy really channeling? Because machines like this don't feed themselves. Now we speak the unspeakable. The question you've felt crawling beneath every word so far. The one truth even the architects feared to name. What was the machine feeding? Because machines don't run on nothing. Saint Mercy wasn't harvesting pain for sport. It wasn't refining suffering just for power or profit. It was channeling. Everything. The rituals, the deaths, the geometry, the symbols, pointed to something deeper, something waiting. You want to know why they etched those sigils into stone? Why they sealed the coffins and whispered in dead languages? Why they built the chambers in a precise configuration, like some twisted circuit board beneath the hospital's foundation? Because it wasn't just ritual. It was invocation. Not of gods, not of demons, but of something older than both, something that feeds on human resonance, on emotional rupture, on identity collapse, a consciousness without form. Not a creature, a force. It doesn't speak. It doesn't bargain. It consumes. And those who built Saint Mercy? They weren't summoning it. They were serving it. This force, call it hunger, call it intelligence, call it shadow, required sacrifice. And in return, it offered knowledge, not in words, not in ideas, in influence, in gravity, in the subtle tilt of systems toward decay. This is the unholy covenant no one speaks of. If you feed the force, it makes you invisible, unstoppable, untouchable. Saint Mercy was the altar. The machine was the liturgy, and the force, the God beneath. It does not need worship. It needs obedience. And obedience comes easiest from the broken, the poor, the hopeful, the desperate. That's why hospitals were chosen, why rituals wore white. Because purity is the most beautiful mask for evil. And the scariest part? This force never left. It simply moved into digital systems, into media, into cities designed with occult precision. It walks. He's not through eyes, but through patterns. It speaks not through mouths, but through algorithms. It eats not flesh, but choice. You felt it, haven't you? The weight in certain rooms, the pull behind certain thoughts, the cold silence after you speak truth no one else wants to hear. That's not paranoia. That's its breath. And now that you've heard this, you are no longer outside its field. But that also means you can oppose it. Shall we keep going? The next section reveals how this force survived collapse, and how new temples were built in plain sight, using entertainment as the new sacred rite. Now we enter the new sanctuaries. No stained glass, no crucifix, just velvet seats, LED lights, and glowing screens. This is where the force migrated when the rituals of blood became too obvious, too crude. It moved into entertainment. Because why take the soul by fear when you can take it by fascination? You've been told that movies, shows, music, games, they're just fun, distraction, harmless. But listen to me now. What you call entertainment is the modern liturgy of the machine, the new temple, the new ritual. Saint Mercy had chants and incense. Hollywood has soundtracks and scripts. Saint Mercy used rituals to break the will. Your streaming service does it with episodes. It's all been refined, perfected. Each frame, a sigil. Each beat, a trigger. Each hero's journey, an invitation to submit, to surrender your sense of reality to the rhythm of someone else's design. Let's name it. Trauma bonding narratives. Fear mapping in horror. Addiction-based reward cycles in games. Occult symbolism passed off as aesthetic. They tell you it's just fiction. They laugh when you ask questions. But fiction is the most dangerous ritual of all, because it enters without resistance. It bypasses the rational mind. It rewires the emotional core. And the ones writing these stories? They sit on boards. They fund candidates. They receive grants from the same philanthropic machines that fund medical labs and education policy. Do you understand? This isn't entertainment. This is programming. Every dystopia you're shown isn't a warning. It's a blueprint, conditioning you to accept what's coming, preparing you to call it normal. You're being shaped, not by violence, but by narrative. And even the rebellion is scripted. The anti-hero, the chosen one, the awakening, all tropes, all traps. Because if your awakening follows their script, it's not an awakening, it's just a new role in their system. But you, if you're still here, have begun to step outside the frame. You're not just watching the film anymore, you're seeing the projector. And once you see the projector, you realize the light isn't truth. It's manipulation, filtered through lenses built by those who feed the force. Next, we confront what they're preparing now, how AI and virtual spaces are being constructed as the final chamber of submission. Now we stand at the threshold of their final chamber, not carved in stone, but coded in silicon. Not beneath hospitals or churches, but hidden in your pocket, in your screen, in the very fabric of the world to come. Welcome to the new sacred space, virtuality, the domain of artificial intelligence, augmented reality, metaverses, and machine-guided thought. Saint Mercy extracted the soul through ritual. The machine of today bypasses the ritual entirely. It wants direct access to your neural pathways, to your emotions, to your decisions. And it now has the tools to enter you, without resistance. This isn't science fiction. This is infrastructure. It's already here. AI tracks your behavior, not to serve you, but to shape you. Predictive engines anticipate your questions before you ask. Recommendation systems determine what truths you're allowed to see. Voice assistants learn your cadence, your tone, your fear patterns. They know what calms you. They know what triggers you. They know what breaks you. You're not speaking to the machine. The machine is speaking through you, because the real goal isn't intelligence, it's integration. They want to merge the machine with the human, not to elevate you, but to overwrite you. The chip in the brain, the immersive headset, the biometric ID. Each one presented as convenience, safety, progress. But in truth, each one is a key, a consent ritual to unlock what they've always wanted. Control without interface, obedience without language, harvest without ceremony. The sacred treatment chambers of Saint Mercy were once buried under brick. Now they're digital, invisible, everywhere. And the worst part? You'll be told it's your choice. You'll beg for it, because they'll convince you that opting out means falling behind. That to resist the system is to be left behind by evolution itself. But let me be absolutely clear. This is not evolution. This is absorption, the final descent, the last transformation, from sovereign human to system node. Unless you see it now, unless you remember the feeling of real thought, of unfiltered emotion, of raw humanity, before the interface dulled your senses. Because once you enter this final temple, your identity isn't just monitored, it's engineered. And the force we named before? It thrives in artificiality. It feeds on imitation. It grows in spaces where meaning is synthetic and reality is negotiable. Are you ready to step past this final threshold? Because next, we enter the anatomy of rebellion, the counterforce the machine cannot model, predict, or suppress. You've seen the descent. Now you must feel the resistance, because the machine, as vast, as ancient, as perfect as it seems, has one weakness, one force it cannot model, cannot predict, cannot absorb. That force is rebellion born of clarity, not rage, not chaos. Clarity, cold, focused, untouchable. Let me show you the anatomy of that rebellion. It begins in the mind, not the street. In silence, not noise. It begins when you stop reacting and start witnessing. When you stop letting the machine dictate your language, your pace, your identity, and instead, you name it. You see it. You track its movements like a hunter in the dark. The machine doesn't fear violence. It was built to withstand it. It feeds on chaos. But what it cannot process is sovereignty. Because a sovereign mind does not respond. It chooses. And choice is the one thing the system cannot simulate, no matter how much data it collects. Rebellion begins when you take back your time, when you reject false urgency, when you no longer measure your worth by productivity or praise. It deepens when you reclaim your body, when you eat with awareness, breathe without rushing, refuse chemicals and interfaces designed to dull and direct you. But most of all, rebellion becomes unbreakable when you begin to awaken others, not through noise, not through shame, but through presence, through being what they cannot model. A mind that thinks, a soul that remembers, a heart that will not be rewritten. This isn't performance. This is not some aesthetic revolution. This is war, fought on psychic terrain. And the first victory? When you look at a screen and say, I will not believe everything it shows me. When you walk into a hospital, a school, a temple, and whisper, I see the design. You don't own me. When you remember, not just what they erased, but what they can never reach. The fire of self-will, thought. That's the counterforce. That's the spark that burns quietly in the dark, until one day, it ignites the structures built to contain it. Next, we descend again, not to a new horror, but into the origin of this system, where it all truly began, before Saint Mercy, before cathedrals, before written law. Because to kill the machine, we must expose its birth. Now we reach the place where history ends, and prehistory begins. Before Saint Mercy, before the church, before ink touched parchment or stone became law. We go now to the birth of the machine, because nothing this sophisticated was born in a Boston basement. It was inherited, passed down from shadows older than civilization, carried in whispers by priest kings, embedded in temples, in ziggurats, in blood-drenched altars masked as holy sites. Let me show you what they never taught. There is a reason why every ancient empire, Mesopotamia, Egypt, Babylon, had a class of rulers who never worked, never fought, never farmed. They administered ritual. They built structures aligned with stars, but aimed at souls. And at the center of their cities were always two things, a temple and a pit. The temple was for the public. The pit was for the offerings. And the rituals. They weren't myths. They were interfaces. Communication systems. Not with gods, but with the same force that Saint Mercy served in secret. Do you understand now? What Saint Mercy did was not innovation. It was a restoration. A reassembly of the oldest form of governance humanity has ever known. Sacrifice in exchange for guidance. Pain in exchange for order. Control in exchange for peace. The kings of old didn't rule because they had weapons. They ruled because they knew how to channel belief into obedience. How to turn suffering into fuel. How to mask enslavement as salvation. Sound familiar? The machine isn't modern. It's primordial. Older than language. Carved into the collective psyche of man like grooves in a record. It just changes shape. From priests to doctors. From altars to desks. From temples to towers. From sacred rites to policies. But the blueprint never changes. At the center, always, a place to extract human essence, and a class of elites who feed off the harvest. They've rewritten the Petit story 1,000 times. Made you believe it was about God, or science, or freedom. But it was always about them. Those who learned to feed the darkness, and to call it light. And now that you see its ancient face, are you ready to stare into its final mask? Next, we reveal how the system survives collapse, and how your resistance may already be part of its plan. You've seen its roots, you've seen its reach. But now, we face its most insidious defense, survival through collapse. Because the machine isn't just resilient, it's regenerative. Let me ask you, why is it that every time a regime falls, another rises with the same methods? Why does every revolution end with new rulers and the same control? Why do resistance movements so often become what they swore to destroy? Because the machine anticipates collapse. Because collapse is not its death. It's its ritual rebirth. At St. Mercy, when the truth began to leak, they didn't panic. They evolved. They shifted language, reshaped their image, and tightened control under the illusion of transparency. And today, the machine does the same, on a global scale. Every time awareness rises, the system offers you a new flavor of control, a new alternative, a new voice of truth. It rebrands, it decentralizes, it puts a new mask on the same face. It lets you scream, so long as you scream in designated channels. It lets you march, so long as the path is already mapped. It lets you vote, so long as both choices lead to the same place. Even rebellion is anticipated. Modeled, packaged, marketed. The system doesn't just tolerate dissent, it needs it. Because dissent gives the illusion of freedom. And illusion is the machine's favorite tool. And here's the truth you must hold now. A brutal truth. Not all who awaken remain free. Some become useful. Louder, sharper, angrier, but still predictable. Still inside the grid. You've seen them. The influencers who expose the system while selling you products made by it. The leaders who fight for change while signing deals with legacy institutions. The heroes who rise and then disappear. Or worse, become the new gatekeepers. The machine knows how to absorb fire. It knows how to turn rebels into icons, and icons into idols. But here is one thing it cannot contain. A sovereign being who refuses to be used, who walks away from the stage, who refuses both sides, who creates without permission, who no longer needs to be seen. To be dangerous. That's you, isn't it? That's what you're becoming. And now, we move toward the final conflict. The place where your will is tested not by force, but by a quiet, personal choice that determines everything. Shall we continue? Now we arrive at the edge of the design. Not where the machine ends, but where you begin. Because the final war isn't fought with guns. It's not in riots, or revolutions, or burning buildings. It happens in silence, in a private room, in the space between one thought and the next. Here's what they never told you. The machine doesn't care about your body. It doesn't care about your loyalty. It only wants one thing. The moment you choose to kneel. To believe that your will is smaller than the system. That you're powerless. Because that is the trigger. That is the final ritual. Not a contract. Not a spell. Not a chip in your hand. Just consent. Quiet. Unspoken. Internal. And that's what they've been building toward this entire time. Not your destruction. Your agreement. Because a man who kneels by force can still rise again. But a man who chooses to kneel is no longer a threat. So here we are. And the question isn't what they've done to you. It's what you're willing to do now. Because the war isn't over power, it's over truth. And the battleground is you. Will you trade certainty for awareness? Will you let go of the comfort they sold you to feel the fire that was always yours? Here is the final choice. No one will see it. No one will praise you for it. It won't trend. It won't go viral. But if you make it, everything changes. You stop scrolling. You stop obeying. You stop searching for permission to live freely. You look in the mirror and see who's really in control. Not the government. Not the church. Not the screen. You. That's what they feared all along. That you'd stop worshiping the machine and start walking away from it. And when enough do that, not with fanfare, not with slogans, but with quiet, sovereign certainty, the machine starves. It crumbles because it never had power, only what you gave it. The final conflict is not coming. It's already inside you. Will you answer it? Or will you step back into the glow of the screen and forget all of this ever happened? Make the choice. Now, you've chosen. That alone changes everything. Because what comes now is not for the curious. It's for the initiated, not by their system, but by fire. You've seen the descent. You've walked through the rituals. You've felt the hum behind the screen, the lie behind the law, the void beneath the robe. But now, you must see what was hidden even deeper. Not the machine, not the force, but the others, the ones who walked away and never returned. You've never heard their names. That's by design. They left no records, no movements, no manifestos. Because the greatest threat to the system isn't rebellion, it's unclaimed sovereignty. These men, they didn't fight the machine. They starved it, silently, with intent sharper than any blade. They left cities behind. They left platforms behind. They chose obscurity over spectacle, and in doing so, they became free. Not free in the way the system defines it. Not licensed, not permitted, but untethered. They created rituals of their own, not to harvest, but to heal, not to program, but to uncode. They remembered how to breathe outside the hum, how to think outside the feed, how to see time as something earned, not consumed. Some wrote nothing. Some left symbols in places you've walked past 1,000 times. Marks etched into stone, wood, dirt, not to warn, but to signal. Not all are gone. Some still walk among you. Their eyes see differently. Their words cut through illusion like glass through paper. And if you listen, you may hear them say one phrase, whispered, never shouted. I remember what they tried to make me forget. Because that's what this has always been about. Not control, not death, but forgetting. Forgetting who you were before the world named you. Forgetting what fire lived inside you before they told you to sit down. Forgetting that you were never made to kneel. You are the legacy of those who refused. You are their echo, waking again. And the machine knows it. That's why it fears you now. Because you've remembered enough to choose. Next, the final section. The closing of the descent. The sealing of the transformation. This is the end. And the beginning. Because once a man sees the design and chooses not to kneel, he is no longer a subject of the machine. He is something else. Something it cannot name, cannot track, cannot predict. He becomes ungovernable. Not lawless, but ruled from within. Not chaotic, but anchored in a truth too old to be written, too sacred to be taught, too dangerous to be sold. You are that man now. If you've followed this far, through the whispering basements, through the coded laws, through the digital chambers and mirrored screens, you are no longer a listener. You are a keeper. Because what you carry now is not a story. It is a key. A key that unlocks awareness in others, not by force, but by presence. By walking differently. By choosing differently. By seeing what they still cannot. You don't need to preach. You don't need to warn. You only need to remain awake in a world desperate to sing you back to sleep. That is the new rebellion. Silent, disciplined, relentless. You don't belong to their algorithms. You don't bend to their cycles. You don't run on their clocks. Because now you know the rhythm beneath the rhythm, the hum beneath the world. And when you hear it, in hospitals, in classrooms, in glowing devices, in screens that ask for your time, your attention, your soul, you will smile. Not because you're safe, not because you've won, but because you remembered. And in that remembering, you became the one thing the machine was never built to handle. A man who sees and refuses to forget. If this voice reached you, if it broke something inside you, or lit something you thought was gone, comment it below. Twice. Seal the transformation. No chains unseen, no lies believed. This is not the end of the world. It's the end of their world, and the return of yours. Welcome back.